So it's just going to take a few moments for the stream to sort itself. And
we're good to go, Owen.
That's great. Thanks, Mandy. So welcome to all members of the Joint Committee, colleagues, and to members of the public who are tuning in to the live stream of this meeting being broadcast on the Colchester Borough Council YouTube channel. My name is Owen Howell. I'm the clerk for the Joint Parking Committee, and I'll be starting proceedings by taking us into item 1 on the agenda, which will be appointment of a chairman for the Joint Committee for the 2020-2021 year. So if I could open this to members of the committee to please make nominations for the chairmanship of the committee.
Michael Talbot speaking. Could I move Robert remains in the chair? He does a fairly good job for us, and better the devil you know, I think is a good saying. So I move Robert.
Thank you, Councillor. Could I have a second for that nomination, please?
I think you were getting it from Councillor Van Dalton, possibly, if that was the hand that I saw.
Yes, that's certainly the case.
That's great. Thank you, Councillor Van Dalton.
I'll second that.
Do I have any other nominations? And I'm not seeing any nominations, so we will go to a vote on this. I'm going to just quickly go through each councillor in name order to ask for your for, against or abstain vote. So Councillor Nigel Avey.
For.
Nigel Avey for. Councillor Danvers.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Eek. For. Councillor Lilly.
For.
For. Councillor Mitchell.
I'm not sure I'm meant to be voting for myself, am I? If I am, I'm for, of course.
You can, yes. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Van Dalken.
For.
And Councillor Talbot.
Yes, for.
Many thanks. So I make that 6 votes for, 1 abstention. So I name Councillor Robert Mitchell has been duly elected as chairman of the committee, and I shall hand over to him to take on proceedings for the rest of the meeting.
Thank you very much. I would also, on the basis that we have had a change of membership, and therefore the previous deputy is no longer with us. I mean, he's still around, but is no longer with us on the Parking Partnership. So I would like to propose as vice chairman Councillor Mike Lilly from Colchester, and would ask for anybody to second that proposal.
Seconded.
Thank you, sir. So on that basis, just holding it round the other way, amongst the members, this is, if all members who are happy to approve that proposal that Councillor Mike Lilly, which I presume he accepts, and you can wave at us, Mike, thank you. If all members in favour, please raise your hand electronically.
Where do we do that, Richard?
You click on the participants, which is at the bottom. You get a list of participants. In the bottom right-hand side of that box, there's a raise hand logo.
I got it. Thank you. Yes, raise my hand.
Now, the problem is that in my participant box, I can't see. Oh, yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I make that 7 hands raised, a unanimous vote to approve, Chairman.
You can see them easier than me. For some reason, I can't see them I can't see them all. But thank you, Owen. So that is approved. Right, Councillor Mike Lilly is approved as our vice chairman. Thank you very much. Welcome, Michael. Well, you're in the committee. You've been in the committee for a while, so it's good. We now need to move on to the welcome and introductions, as I mentioned just before this meeting started. So Owen has already introduced himself. I'm Councillor Robert Mitchell. I'm the Deputy Cabinet Member for Highways and Infrastructure at Essex County Council. And the new returning chairman. If I can go down the list, Amanda, or Mandy, I believe that is.
Amanda Chidgey, a Democratic Services Officer, supporting Owen technology-wise.
Thank you. Richard Clifford.
Richard Clifford, Democratic Services Officer, Colchester, likewise supporting Owen.
This list is changing. Councillor Danvers, welcome to the Essex Parking Partnership.
Thank you very much. It's Harlow Council, replacing Danny. Danny's got far too much to do. Obviously, I had got enough to do, so I've got blessed with the parking partnership. I have been on it before when we actually started, but I've got responsibility for finance, basically because it rakes in quite a bit of money. So our car parks are quite important to our budget. So I suppose the rationale is that I've been given the short straw.
Well, if you call it short, I hope we'll be able to lengthen it for you. And I hope that Danny, who served us very well, and I would like to pay tribute to his balance of debate and everything else. I did send him a note when he informed us that he was no longer going to be able to do the role.
He was appreciative of that.
Well, he deserves it because he's a balanced gentleman who had some very good experience, and we recognise that. So that was really good. But welcome anyway to the fold.
Thank you.
Talbot. If you'd like to unmute yourself. Oh, you are unmuted.
Yes, I'm sorry you asked. I'm the Environment Portfolio Holder for Tendering District Council, and have been actually virtually since constitutions were agreed in 2001. So I've done it for quite a few years, apart from a short period of 4 years. Parking partnership business is quite new to me. It was never part of the Environment Portfolio Holder, but with the reduction of our council from 60 members to 48, it was one of those things that was attached to the Environment Portfolio Holder. So I'm pleased to be here. Thank you, Robert.
As it is for Councillor Van Dalken.
Yes, Richard Van Dalken from Councillor from Braintree.
Thank you. Got to get this blooming thing going. Sorry about this. My scrolling is not very good on this system. Right. Ian Taylor, please.
Yes, Ian Taylor. I'm the head of public realm at Tendering District Council. I'm glad you can hear me. I'm having trouble with my actual separate speaker to this, so if I look distracted, there's a piece of IT to my right that's driving me mad at the moment.
Okay, you can always turn the video off if you want to feel distracted in private, if that makes sense, as long as your ears still work.
Oh no, I wouldn't deprive you of that, Chairman.
Councillor Ike.
Thank you. Yes, it's Eat actually, but
sorry, my apologies.
I'm a member for Alresford District Council and portfolio holder and cabinet member for transport, infrastructure and Stansted Airport.
That's good. Councillor Lilly.
Councillor Michael Lilly from Colchester Borough Council.
And Councillor Avey.
Thank you, Chairman. From Epping Forest District Council, and I'm Environment, Contracts and Technical Services portfolio holder, and parking is my joy, as you can imagine.
As it is for many of us who are a long way away from Epping Forest, but all covered in red paint. I'm going to go to Hayley McGrath now, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, my name's Hayley McGrath. I'm the Corporate Governance Manager for Colchester Borough Council, and I support the Joint Committee on Risk and Governance Issues.
Thank you. Jake. Jake, you with us? He was. Not going to introduce himself. James Warren.
Hi, thank you. James Warwick, Service Manager for Contracts for Epping Forest District Council.
Thank you. Jason.
Yeah, Jason Butcher, Parking Project Manager for NEPP.
Kim.
Thank you, Chairman. Kim Dulani, Service Director, Contracts and Technical for Epping Forest District.
Linda, please.
Hi, I'm Linda Howes, Economic Development Officer at Uttlesford District Council.
And Lisa, have we got Lisa?
Hi, my name's Lisa Hinman. I'm the Area Manager for North Essex Parking Partnership.
Okay, and Liz.
Hi, I'm Liz Burr. I'm Health Network and Safety for Essex County Council and Traffic Manager for the authority. And one of the areas of my responsibility is parking, and I support Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. Very well indeed. Lou.
Hi, Lou Belgrove, and I'm the Business Manager for the Parking Partnership.
Thank you. And Miroslav.
Hi, everyone. It's Geographic Information System Manager for Harlow Council.
With Richard, Rory, and Samir in that order, if you don't mind, because my list keeps up and down.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Richard Walker, the Operational Group Manager for NEPP Operational Service. Before I leave on to the next person, I just want to introduce Jake England, who's joining us on the management team. Jake was successful last week in the role of Data-Led Service Manager. So he'll be taking on the business as usual operation of the projects as an outcome of what we've decided to put in. So welcome, Jake.
Well done, Jake.
Thank you.
Rory and then Samir, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rory Doyle. I'm the Assistant Director for Environment at Colchester Borough Council, Client Officer for Colchester Borough Council, and NEPP operations sit within my directorate at the council. Lovely to meet you all. This is my first meeting. I'm taking over from Richard Block, who you probably know from before.
Fantastic. Thank you and welcome. And Samir, last but not least.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm Samir Pandya, the Strategy and Policy Manager for Braintree District Council, and also a proud member of NEPP, especially with the off-street parking contract that we have and the excellent work that our colleagues do at NEPP. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. I think that has got everybody. If I've missed anybody out, will you please unmute yourself and say your name and your role? No, I think we've managed to get through that despite my list changing its interest. So thank you for those introductions. We have no apologies. Do we have any declarations of interest? Bearing in mind that if you do, or you suddenly realise that you have a declaration of interest while we're discussing it, you can add it on at the time. So any declarations of interest, please, from the members? You'll have to raise your hand if you do. I don't see any.
No hands raised as far as I can see, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I tell you what, Owen, you're welcome to do something like that if I'm looking for hands raised, as in 0, or a number of fingers, because you're sticking in the corner of my screen and the participant thing is not as good as it should be in this particular thing. We have no requests to speak from members of the public, so that's okay. And we need therefore to approve as a correct record of the minutes the last meeting that we held in January, which seems like a very long time ago. So can we share the minutes on screen? I don't know.
We can do if one of my colleagues could please bring that up. Richard, if you'd be able to share your screen. That's great, thank you.
That's great. So we'll need to probably scroll through it. I need to know whether anybody, it's probably going to be easier to unmute yourself and quickly say your name if there's anything in the minutes that you believe is incorrect. I've been on the website for a little bit.
I would like to, it's Derek Eek here. I would like to make points, if I may, on the minute under item 55, page number 3.
Okay. Right, there we go.
Right at the first paragraph, in answer to questions from the committee, officers showed that pay book would be possible from bids 1 and 2. It wasn't officers, it was myself who made that point at the meeting. Officers from UDC were not present.
Okay. It was, wasn't it? Yes. Trying to remember the meeting. Thank you.
Second point was down on the penultimate paragraph on that page. The chairman recommended that the joint committee approve all bids. I do not recall that there was an understanding that additional work would be carried out and details required to clarify such issues where the payments are made back into reserves. I do not recall that. Are all these minutes recorded as such?
They weren't recorded because it wasn't an electronic meeting. They weren't recorded verbatim, and it wasn't a televised or webcast meeting. It was in Epping Forest from my memory. And I know that we did have significant discussions at the time, a lot of comments made, and Councillor Purton was very verbal in a lot of those as well. I do seem to remember that this is a good rendition of the responses that were made, or précis of them, because we needed to investigate effectively the validation and the business case that went with some of those proposed schemes.
I don't dispute that. There was an awful lot of talking going on, but I do recall that both Danny Purton and myself made the point that are we approving these bids, these particular 2 bids or not? And the answer was yes. I personally do not recall that the further details were requested, so I'd like that recorded if I may, please.
Richard, could you comment on that possibly?
We've a number of Richards, haven't we? Do you mean?
Sorry,
Walker?
yeah, I meant you.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about the bids was the way they were scored and whether there would be any payback made, which is what the reference to payback in there is for. And it wasn't clear at the time whether any of these would pay back any, some, or all of the revenues. So we conditionally approved things as far as I can remember.
Again, I don't dispute that, and we have, as you know, had further correspondence, both myself and Councillor Mitchell and yourself and officers. I'm not disputing that at all, that further information has been requested. I'm just, I do not recall it being specifically mentioned in the meeting as recorded in those minutes, and I would just like my comment to be recorded in these minutes, please.
Okay. I mean, are you able to add an addendum, as it were, to that, or do you put it into this meeting? So
yes, I can record it in the minutes for this meeting.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's continue on with the minutes as they are, unless everybody who's read them already and is happy with them. Please.
Can I make a comment, Robert?
Yes, certainly.
I see there was one item on page, it's a tremendous agenda, isn't it? 106 pages, by the way. I hope your jaws to which page we're on at times. But on page 7 at the bottom, it says the trial was going to be carried out to produce evidence and the financial effects of taking on the provision of disabled parking bay installation. And that item was deferred to the committee meeting on the 19th of March.
Which, of course, got thrown into a cocked hat by the COVID.
Yeah, so we didn't have that meeting when evidence was going to be presented to show the likely effects and when evidence can be given relating to the levels of demand and blue badge uptake. I just wondered that we've obviously lost a couple of months on that, but was the work done and what was the result?
Richard Walker again, please.
It's on the bottom of page 7 and the top of page 8.
No, that's fine.
I think this relates back to the report that we received from Essex County Council, and I fear that rather the emergency measures have overtaken everything the County Council has been doing with regard to the highway of late, and I know they're still under some pressure to put in the social distancing measure, so no further work has been done on that as far as I'm aware from the County Council's end.
Could we note it for future, for probably the next meeting, because it is something we still want to pursue. The difficulty is that this is like an ancillary scheme that is working at the moment. There are a lot of other things that have got in the way, it's certainly in the form of disability access, etc., etc. So actually sticking with something which isn't completely broken at the moment is probably the best option until we get back to a new normal, which will be different from the old normal. So if we can just put this as a sort of floating item that needs to go into the next meeting, if we get the chance to investigate anything between now and then I'm sure that will be considered. But I have a feeling I completely concur with Richard, and I know how 24/7 this has been for those of us in the highways portfolios, particularly in the last month or two. So we'll float it forward to a next convenient moment, but it isn't forgotten.
Yeah, fine.
Right. Can we continue to go down on that, whoever's running this sharing? If there's, we've got comments about the obstructive footway parking, haven't we, Richard?
Yes, I'll give you a verbal update
Forward
on that
later, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So are we all happy, therefore? We have got to the, I think, is that the end of the minutes?
That's the end, Mr. Chairman. Richard, if
Yes,
you'd be able to stop sharing your screen. That's great, thank you.
Right, so from members who can remember that they were there, can we, actually we've got everybody on screen from a member point of view, so actually we can use a show of hands. So all of those members who are happy to approve the minutes of the last meeting, please show your hands.
Those comments.
Yes, thank you very much. So that's approved, and we will go forward. Right. So I'm just looking at my notes on the other screen. So the annual governance review, I think that's Hayley, isn't it?
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Your turn.
Thank you very much. This is the annual report for you concerning the governance of the partnership and the services that are provided. Previously, you would have had to have provided a small bodies return for your statement of accounts. That's no longer required, but it's still good practice for us to do a review of the governance arrangements in place to ensure for all partners that the processes are appropriate and that monies are protected. So looking back over 1920 for the governance review, a lot of the systems that are in place in the service are actually managed by Colchester Borough Council. And I can confirm that Colchester Borough Council's annual governance statement has been drafted and that all of the systems and processes have received either a substantial or a full assurance rating. There's no concerns raised from that I need to raise with yourselves. We also look at risks, and there's a second report on this agenda looking specifically at the risk management process, so I'll go into more detail about that in a moment. We also look at the services, the awards the service might have won during the year, and I'm pleased to say that there were several, especially for the accounts, the annual report, and obviously that is really good news, and that goes into our review of governance arrangements. One thing I do have to highlight on the governance review is actually the impact of COVID-19. Whilst it was the very tail end of the year and is probably a period of between 2 and 4 weeks actually impact of the pandemic. We can't say for sure that all of the systems and processes in place were appropriate at that time. Because of the nature of the emergency and the way that we had to change our services, both at CBC and within the partnership, it could be that some of the control arrangements were not as effective. But at this point in time, there is no indication that that's the case. Going forwards for 2021, we will actually be looking at COVID-19 in detail, both at Colchester Borough Council and for the service. And actually any issues raised will be obviously reported back to yourselves. A large part of the governance review comes from our internal audit programme, and there were 2 audits carried out for the service during the year. So the first one was the annual review, so we do that every year to ensure that the processes are correct, that money is properly recorded and accounted for, that the systems in place are working effectively. And I'm pleased to say there was a substantial assurance rating received on that audit, and there was only 2 recommendations raised. One of those at the moment is probably going to be delayed, as in the review of cash collection. Obviously, with the current situation, that's had a bit of an impact. And the other one was consideration of summary of complaints in the e-brief, which I understand has already taken place. There was a second ad hoc audit carried out during the year at the request of the parking manager. And that was looking at the back office controls, not because there had been any particular issues, but because it was felt that some of those controls could be improved. There were some recommendations that came out of that report, and they're highlighted for you in the appendix. And I'm pleased to say that all of those have been taken on board and have been dealt with. So for the purposes of this report, I'd like you to note the annual governance review of the Parking Partnership and review and comment on the attached internal audit reports. Thank you.
Okay, does any member wish to make a comment on any of those? I'm very pleased to see that we've had a decent response. Richard Van Dalken, I've got you in a moment, and that's really good to see. So confirmation that we seem to be doing things very right. Councillor Van Dalken, and then Councillor.
Yeah, thank you very much. One of the hats I have is as chairman of our corporate governance or audit committee at Braintree, and I'd just like to ask where and indeed can we at some stage actually see how this internal audit or the internal audits are treated by the external auditors of Colchester Borough. I'm not suggesting you need an external audit of the of NEPP, but I hope you follow what I'm saying. That we're relying, and I have no negative reason for saying this. It's just good practice, I think, to suggest that it would be a good idea to see what an external auditor might say about your internal audit of NEPP.
Councillor Talbot.
I was only going to make the comment. I thought it was a bit much. 5.5 on that. The ad hoc audit that Hayley referred to. The first item on that, the first bullet point, is updating the parking policies. What an omnibus recommendation from an auditor. Whatever does it mean? I know there's a number of items listed after that, half a dozen other bullet points, but that seemed a bit strange to be in an audit report.
If I'm not much mistaken, that's updating the parking policies in a Colchester issue specifically, rather, is it not, rather than a NEPP issue?
Ah.
Yeah, I know that Richard.
I did refer to the fact that it was an ad hoc audit.
Yes, Richard Walker, please.
Yeah, the parking policies piece, we occasionally bring parking policies to the Joint Committee for updating. And you'll remember, those of you who have been long serving, we had a particularly long AGM a number of years ago where we updated the entire lot. And I said, never again, we'll bring them one at a time. So we've seen the parking on the footway, we've seen the TRO policy of late, we've seen our parking management strategy. at a previous meeting. So I intend to bring one of those per meeting, avoiding the AGM, which is this meeting. And of course, this meeting is somewhat longer because we have the March and June meetings together here. So I thought I'd avoid this agenda if I possibly could, but bring them to a future meeting, and we'll update those policies. And all along, our drive has been to make them simpler, more understandable, and easier to understand for the public. So yeah, we'll do some more work on those and bring them another one back to the October meeting and keep them going. Unless, of course, the regulations or legislation changes in the meantime, and we'll bring something straight back.
Which is the lesson that we learned from that meeting in Colchester Town Hall in June, whatever year it was. It seems almost yesterday for those of us who painfully went through it. But if you think that 160 pages is a lot, or 120 pages or whatever, then that was about 300 or more pages. It was rather painful. So very keen, along with the annual report, of course, which we produce in 4 quarters, rather than having a massive blitz to produce a huge report once a year. So it's a rolling report and allows for much more comprehensive, I think, and focused points to be made as we put it forward. Councillor Eade.
Are we not using the raised hand system?
Yeah, were you putting your hand up? I saw it.
Yes, no, I've had my blue hand up for some time. So.
Right, my apologies, because I'm not on the participant at the same time.
Oh, okay. Well, I won't bother with that anymore.
The difficulty is, unfortunately, that the list in the participants doesn't prioritise itself. It moves when people speak, which I hadn't appreciated. It doesn't stay static, so you're not in one place with all the councillors in one place. So it's easier if we're keeping video of councillors and some officers. That's fine. Put your hand up, and I will notice it. If you see me nodding or pointing in a direction or something, you won't know where you are on my screen, but you know I've got it.
Thank you.
But
we have had an issue during the year, that is Uttlesford, in that monies collected from our car parks has been paid to Braintree. Now, this was obviously luckily noticed. I believe it has been rectified, but I'm surprised it hasn't figured in this governance review and report, because it's quite a serious issue in that monies collected from one district is being paid to another district, and there didn't appear to be checks and balances. It was, I believe, I'm sure officers will correct me if I'm wrong, it was picked up by officers and sorted out between them rather than coming from a quality control, if I can put it that way, system in NEPP.
As a systems man, if this has been happening, then Richard, I'd like you to, yes, address it, please.
Yes, it relates to the off-street, of course, and this is the on-street committee, so it won't be picked up in the on-street report here. We'll deal with that at the off-street reviews that we have. Relates to G4S, the cash collector paying the wrong account. There's a number of accounts joint, and Colchester is the lead authority for all of those at the off-street as well. And where, for some reason, G4S moves the money to another place, they sometimes pay the wrong account. Can only be picked up by reconciliation, unfortunately.
Sorry, my mistake, wrong meeting.
Yeah, it is a systems failure, and as a systems person, there must be something wrong in the system. By the sounds of things, it's G4S, which we ought to stick our oar in and say that there should be almost a recompense when they make errors like that. I was going to call it something else with 2 words, but yes.
I can refer further to that when we meet to talk about the off-street operation, and they're up for contract renewal soon, so we'll have a chance to change their contract as well.
Great. Okay, is everybody happy with that? Richard Van Dalken.
So I don't think I got an answer to my admittedly rather rambling question, whether the external audit for Colchester Borough actually gets into NEPP.
Ellie?
Yes, of course. With regards to the external audit process, what we can't do is direct them to where they should be auditing. Obviously, the income from the partnership is a significant amount of money and does form part of everybody's accounts. What we do with our external auditors is we have conversations with them and they see all of our audit reports. So they have access to the reports, they see what's been undertaken, they have access to our internal auditors to talk to them and ask questions. They then decide whether they need to do any further testing. So the fact they haven't carried out any further testing, they haven't identified any areas that they wish to review, means that they are happy with the reports that are being produced by our auditors. If they had concerns, they would be raising those separately and asking for further in-depth testing. At this point in time, they're not. What I would say in general is we have actually just changed auditors at Colchester, our internal auditors. So we were using Mazars up until the 31st of March this year. We're now using a company by the name of TIA Limited, and they took over the contract on the 1st of April. So they'll be doing a new review of parking. So it'll be a fresh set of eyes looking at the parking processes and the systems. So if there are concerns, I'm sure that they'll be raising them later on in the year.
Thank you very much.
If there are no other comments, I want to thank Hayley very much for that. And is everybody happy with that? Just a quick show of hands. Do that report. Thank you very much. It's Hayley, you again on the risk register.
Yes, thank you very much.
Been a bit busy with, I would imagine, in the last month or two.
Yes, there's been a few things going on, shall we say. So you have an annual review of risk management. You have a duty and an obligation to ensure that your risks are managed appropriately for each of the partners. So as part of that governance framework, you have assurance that the key issues are being considered and monitored. So for the purposes of this report, I've revised the risk management strategy for 2020-21 going forward for you. There's no particular changes to that. The process works appropriately. It's based on Colchester Borough Council's risk management process, which is also signed off by our internal auditors and our external auditors. And I've also set out for you the strategic risk register, and I would like you to have a look at that and approve any suggested amendments that have been made. The register is reviewed with myself and the parking services manager, and then the client officers have an opportunity to comment on it. So we go through and we have a look at those risks to make sure they're still appropriate, or if anything needs changing or adding. So as part of this review, there were some changes that have been recommended. So 3 of the risks have been recommended for removal, and that's on the basis of they are not significant. The risk register should be a complete risk of things that are live and that have the potential to have a large impact and are quite likely to happen, as opposed to just a list of things that could go wrong. So the 3 areas identified have been on the register for a little while. They haven't materialised, and actually they are in some respects business as usual. They are things that could happen, but we have no indication that they're going to. It's also been recommended that 2 risks, 1.13 and 1.15, are reduced because the impact of those has not materialised as anticipated. However, there is still potential for those. So at this point in time, we are recommending that they are reduced down. They can be increased at any time. And obviously we are recommending the inclusion of a new risk, which is relating to COVID-19. What we don't want to do on the risk register is have every risk with a COVID-19 impact. It's more appropriate to have a separate management tool, if you like, to oversee the recovery from the pandemic as we go forwards. It's appropriate for the strategic risk register to actually recognise that and to highlight it. And actually we are recommending that is your highest risk going forwards, because the recovery process is going to be so key, and the impact that COVID-19 has had on the service at the moment and also in the future. And with COVID-19, what would happen is we have a separate, if you like, register that would look at those particular issues. And I'm working on COVID-19 registers for Colchester Borough Council and our joint services as we speak. And that's looking at things like such as the economic risk, sustainability, social risk and technology. And we're looking at how other authorities are working with those risk registers as well. So it's whether you had any questions on the risks, anything that you wanted to discuss in terms of risk, anything you wanted to add, or any other changes that you require.
So opening the floor to questions.
Well, if I may, Rob.
Okay.
On the assurance levels, the one labelled substantial, it says where there's we basically have a sound system of internal control, but there are weaknesses which put some of our objectives at risk. There is evidence that the level of non-compliance with some of the control processes may put some of the client's objectives at risk. It sounds a lot. It sounds terribly important, but I really wondered whether there was actually anything in it. We're not aware of any major problems arising from non-compliance of regulations, are we?
Hayley, can you answer that? I don't, or Richard?
I think when we're talking about substantial assurance, that might be the previous item. That's looking at the assurance levels for our internal audits. So you had a substantial...
This is risk assessment.
Yeah, which page are you looking at? Which particular page?
I'll just scroll down to the bottom of the page. Page 13 of 106.
That's actually just a tell us what we're talking against. If it was to come up as a substantial risk, it's not specifically mentioning any of the risks that have been identified, is it?
Yeah.
It's like an index. It's not referring to actual risk. It's referring to the no limited assurance, etc. It's the same in pretty much all local authority risk assessment matrix. I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong.
It's the standard wording.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought.
Oh, Hayley's got it.
Otherwise, is everybody happy to accept this report?
Yes.
Thank you. So we need to move on to finance, which is Richard. And members will notice that in this large theoretical agenda with lots of pages, that we're on page 70 already.
Thank you.
Scroll through to the finance report. We're going to have a look at the budget and financial position in a bit more detail in a minute. We've had some really unusual operating circumstances just lately, and it's meant that we've had to complete halt to all of our operations of late before we recommenced again. So I've been trying to keep members and client officers up to date with the steps we've been taking and keep them in line with our national guidance. And to that end, I've been emailing you with the details of how we've been complying with that guidance throughout, the levels of enforcement we've been undertaking, patrols, payment plans and the like we've been putting in, and also added 3 months validity onto residence parking because it was the right thing to do and was part of the guidance at the time. Now, as Councillor Mitchell briefly suggested there, and in the past, we've got some reserves to help us see us through bad weather in the winter, saving for a rainy day if you like, and this emergency has probably accounted for about 3 times what we'd normally experience if we had a bad February or the like. Our in-year surplus from the last financial year, which we would have started to report in March and again now, was significant enough, and that has helped. There's no doubt that's helped tide us over this emergency that we found ourselves in, completely unprecedented. We had 285,000 as a surplus of the in-year operation last year. That's already taking into account the first few days and week of the emergency measures having been taken place. So that in-year surplus has no doubt that will help tide us over now, and we'll probably not end up adding anything fresh into the surplus and reserve fund in this current financial year, but anything extra that we would have made will of course be used within this year. Now, that might put some of our projects at a bit of a risk, but we think there's sufficient funds and reserve in place at the moment to help us carry those out. Now, we probably need to look a bit more in detail at those projects as we move through, and there's another report a bit later on. But I think Lou's going to introduce briefly the detail of where we find ourselves, and we also have the budget for the year to approve as well, which we should have done at the March meeting. So there's just a few introductory words, and over to Lou.
Okay, there's not too much more to add to what Richard's already said. From the Appendix 1, you can see where we ended up at the end of the last financial year, and as Richard explained, that will be used to cover the fact that we found ourselves in a rather unusual position at the end of the financial year. So in a way, it's good for us because we're able to cover the loss of income due to COVID, but from within last year's surplus. And we would just ask you to agree the proposed budget for this financial year 2021, and as you will see, it mirrors pretty much that of previous years.
Councillor Davis. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, not quite sure what's happened now.
You've somehow turned off your camera, but you have turned on your microphone. That's good. No, that's looking good.
We're back. Sorry, do beg your pardon. At the end of the day, I'm quite happy with this, but I don't know if it's already something that's been taken, but what concerns me is the cost of parking permits. And it's very controversial in Harlow. And it seems to be that there is some provision for an increase. Now, if we're running at a surplus, I do not see why. I accept, obviously, with the present crisis, the financial position cannot be clear now. But if we're theoretically running at a surplus, why on earth are we actually increasing the cost of parking permits, please?
We have had a long-standing issue, and we have got parking permits to discuss after this.
Okay.
Richard, do you want to make a comment?
Yes, if you don't mind. When we first started out the parking partnership, we were faced with a very large deficit, and one of the places that we first looked was into the residence parking permits to make sure that they were covering their costs. And you'll see that on the table there on page 73.
Sorry, I can't hear any of this.
Can you hear me? Everybody else hear me all right?
You might have, yes, you might have turned down your volume by mistake a little bit.
Can you hear me all right?
You're quite faint there, Richard.
No, Richard's okay for me, but it's the individual volumes for those people receiving, because sometimes if it's, I don't know what Councillor Danvers is using.
It's continually breaking up for me.
That may be your broadband. If you turn your camera off, then that might improve your bandwidth and therefore your audio bandwidth, because the camera obviously takes a chunk out. And then, can you hear me okay, Councillor Danvers?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we'll let Richard have another go.
Am I clear as well now? Clearer? All good?
Yes, you are now. Good
Lovely.
tip, thank you.
Yep, we've cracked it. So on the table on page 73, we can see that we've 4 areas of income into our service. Penalty charges, and they pretty much break even. We've got parking permits and season tickets, and they pretty much break even. And then we've got pay and display, which is sole income source really, and that's pretty much where the majority of the surplus comes from. So in terms of parking permits, we try and keep that to cover its costs, just in case we have no other income from parking charge or penalty charge. We might one day have no penalty charges whatsoever, and we'd need to change the way the business model works, of course. Yeah, the majority of the surplus from which we're compiling the projects comes from other charges on the highway and the other income that we get.
And if I may point out, from a history point of view, we did have a wide disparity of parking permit prices across the partnership. We did resolve some years ago to even those up a little bit. In the most cases, though, one is looking at a parking permit in the region of £1 a week, or a little more maybe. Of course, it doesn't in parking permit areas necessarily guarantee you're going to get a parking space, but it does allow the traffic to move better, and that's the main purpose. We want to keep traffic flowing, we want to keep parking reasonable, and we want to also encourage people, whether it be it by stealth finance, if you like to call it that, to consider their methods of transport and what sort of, how they're getting from place to place. We have also had the ability to be quite innovative, mostly because we are very much data-led, which Jake is now leading on in a bit more, and I'm sure we'll talk about in other meetings. The flexibility offered by My Permit and the electronic systems means that we can offer, and we started in Harlow with exactly this, where we had issues with carers, for instance, who were trying to park in residence parking areas, but they were obviously doing a good job. And it was unfair to ask the resident to pay for a visitor's parking ticket. So people like that, a caring company, for instance, pays a very low price for a permit that covers them for the whole of Harlow, for instance, because those essential workers need to get to do their job and help the people they need to help. So loads of flexibility that we've got within the permit schemes. But there are, it is a double-edged sword. There is no such thing as free parking. People need to address that. If they choose to live in a house that doesn't have, or has a garage which they don't use, then they've got an option: buy a parking ticket, buy a permit ticket, or permit rather, or use the garage. So it's things like that. There are lots of other anomalies that go with it, but we do have the flexibility where appropriate, and we have exercised it in numerous areas to be very innovative of how we can, the parking partnership can provide the best service. Does that help answer the question?
Yes, in part. I think I've got the problem because somebody else was using a computer as well. Yes, well, thank you for quite a lot of the detailed explanations. The other thing that occurs to me is that if we know particular states where this is a particular problem, whether in fact, rather than actually have everybody paying the same, whether in fact there could be some exceptions. The Hyde, which is right next to the town centre in Harlow, is one of the poorest sections of the Harlow community, and its age profile equally is quite old. And in those circumstances, as you suggested, there are quite a lot of people actually having carers and so on, and family members coming to the home and so forth. And okay, it's not easy to decide how you're going to make exceptions, but one would have thought that perhaps if certain areas of poverty can be identified, then perhaps some system of localized charging could be envisaged.
Richard, can I ask you to answer that possibly?
Yes, of course, the carer permit that we've just alluded to for people who are coming to visit, and if there's a large number of people who are taking care of somebody who's got no other means of parking and needs the road outside, then that is for them. We've looked in the past, and also one of the very first reports that I put to the Joint Committee when we started looking at this very thing. Different areas have different layouts, and if you have a wide road and you can see down it and there's not very many cars parked there, it doesn't take you quite so long to patrol the area. The cost of patrolling is a little bit lower. Where you've got a tightly packed or small street with lots of cars in it, it takes quite a lot longer. And that's what the variation in the charges represents between the different districts, as we'll come down to it. But they have been put all together in the district because each of those areas is equivalent to one traffic regulation order, and those are the areas for which the prices are set. We could look at different prices for different things, but we have a bit of a law of diminishing returns in that the cost of the administration and how we set those prices is going to increase, and will become a much larger portion of that job than actually doing the job on the street, if you see what I mean. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, I think, in that. We could look at a different measure for the types of street, and we could look at other ways of designing permit charges in future. We're also looking at different ways to operate our patrols as well, and hence the new data-led services team that I introduced Jake as the manager of at the very start. We're looking at different ways we can patrol and hopefully reduce the price that it costs us to patrol as well. So there's a few things in it, and yeah, we're very conscious and trying to minimise particularly the annual permit cost as much as we can. And certainly the advent of the online and annual digital permit has stopped the price of that having to increase. Before we started NEPP, that was already recommended at being £70. So you know, we're not at that stage in anywhere but 1 or 2 at the moment.
Thank you. Yes, as Richard has pointed out, we did have an issue where effectively we were issuing parking permits, physical ones, that cost more to produce than they ever gained in income. So actually, they were being subsidised anyway for many years. So we have changed that quite dramatically, improved the efficiency, improved the lack of cash collection and all the other bits that go with it, with the digital offering, which almost everybody is on for pretty much everything that we do. Are there any? So are there any other questions about this particular bit? I'm looking across members. Councillor Ike, yeah. Eek, sorry. Right. Keep on sticking the Y in it.
We seem to have strayed into item 11. I'm not sure if that's where we're now talking, but looking down the permit prices, obviously, Oxford seem to be, if not the most expensive, pretty much there. And the point I'd like to make is that in the areas where we have an issue with parking, we are a medieval grid, but we have a surfeit of small cottages who are tenanted or resident, are not necessarily the most affluent in the whole area. And with the COVID crisis, there are a number of people obviously who have employment issues going forward. So we're in a situation where raising of the cost of parking permit seems a little insensitive. The other point,
I think maybe if we can get back to the matter in hand and come back to this in a moment and recognise those points in advance, because we just need to agree the financial report that Richard was pointing out, and we have strayed, as you quite correctly point out, on the next thing. So what we would like to do, what I would like to do is agree or note the finance report and to approve the budget for next year, which is similar, but as with all these things, things can change, and we actually don't really know what's going to be happening next year because we don't know how long this COVID is going to be going on.
In approving this, do we also approve the increase in the permit charges?
No.
Oh, that's fine.
Issue, separate report. So is everybody happy with a show of hands to approve the financial report?
I make that unanimous approval, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thanks, sir. Thanks for the extra help. So let us move on to, it's page 75 in paper form or 83 in electronic form.
Let everybody scroll through to the page, and as you're finding that, I'll make a little introduction, if that's all right.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Sorry, Richard. Yeah.
So if you're finding that, get to the permit prices report on page 75. It's an important area, and as I alluded earlier, it made the difference for the NEPP operation being financially independent was when we were setting the prices at a level where they covered that full operation of the scheme, not just the patrols, but the maintenance and the administration as well. I'm glad to say we've reached a position where it's not necessary to put large increases into place to cover the operation of the permit scheme anymore, since we've made the economies with those annual accounts and the My Permit system in particular, which has saved us having to send out lots of pieces of paper. And as Councillor Mitchell alluded earlier on, sometimes sending the piece of paper out cost more than the value of the thing we were sending. We do keep the daily permit administration costs covered by setting the permit prices to where we are, and the report shows the areas that we need to focus. So if Lou just wants to take us through in a bit more detail, the table there's a table a little further through the report in the appendix, which covers the details, the prices, and if you scan across, you'll see that we're not proposing any substantial increase at all. The only place where we're really looking for increases is in a small amount in the second permit, and in the daily visitor permit charges, which is where the cost of administration really lie if we're issuing numbers of those. But I'll just leave it to Lou to make any other points on the report before we go through.
I think yeah, thank you. I think the only thing that we need to note really is that whilst we've frozen the prices of the first permit, where we have increased the prices, where the demand for curbside parking is stretched. So where somebody needs a second permit or even potentially a third permit, we have increased the price there, because we're hoping that to a certain extent it only appeals to those people that actually need it, and they think twice about having it, because of the fact that in many of our schemes we are oversubscribed, and we're trying to ensure that the people that get the parking are the people that actually need it. So I think we recognise that people need the resident permits, and we've got those set at a cost now that covers the cost of the operation. But those that need a second or third permit, in by discretion with the third permits, there is a cost incurred with those. And the same with visitor permits. If you're looking to buy a paper permit, which cost significantly more than obviously the digital permits to administer, then you will be paying for that for that privilege. So I think that, I mean, that's about it. I'm happy to answer questions, but I think the pricing structure is quite fair. When you work out what you actually pay per day, it is a very low charge compared to off-street prices, if you like. So yeah, we are. I think we've been more than fair in this suggestion.
And we haven't yet mentioned, I've got Councillor Danvers and in. We haven't actually mentioned the fact that as soon as the COVID came upon us, almost very quickly, we were able to extend everybody's permits for 3 months.
Yep.
So actually that does address an awful lot of issues, and we've been focusing now for 6-7 years on the issue of trying to get things more electronic. They are pretty much rolling over there. Yes, there's a bit of a dent in somebody's pocket if they want physical permits, but it's very infrequent that they do, and there has to be account taken of that. So,
I think it might also be worth mentioning that in regard to enforcement, we're still not actually enforcing resident parking zones, because we're aware of the people are working from home. There's more demand on those spaces, and so since the end of March, we haven't been putting that extra pressure on those residents, as well as the fact that we've given them the 3 months added on to the end of every permit that we actually issue, whether that be a carer's permit or a resident permit.
And as members, I hope, will have seen, there have press releases out that effectively mean the only enforcement is try and make sure that there is safe access for the emergency and essential vehicles. If you park sensibly, you're not going to get a ticket. If you park like an idiot, then you deserve to get stuffed. Councillor Avey first, then Councillor Danvers, and then Councillor Egan, please.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, at first, a comment which echoing something another member said, that COVID taken into account, in fact, we're about to enter probably into a very bad recession. And I think any increases in tariffs, parking or permits will go down badly with residents. They are going to be squeezed. And my issue is with the second resident permit, which is widely used in Epping Forest, and increasing that I'm not in favour of. And also the visitor permits packs have gone up considerably. The direction of travel on that second resident permit appears to be upwards. And I think residents wouldn't want to take these out if they could, but with children living at home because they can't afford to buy their own place, or because of COVID, or whatever the reason, I think there's a much marked increase in this area in requests for second and third permits. The other thing that I'd like to see is, by all the geographical areas, where's the take-up of these permits? So we could see perhaps percentages comparing Epping Forest, Tendring, Harlow, actually the percentages and where the income is coming from, if that will be possible. Thank you.
Take all the three questions first, if you don't mind. Thank you. Councillor Danvers, thank you.
Thank you. Once again, I don't want to make special pleading. I echo the sentiments that were expressed just now. But to a certain extent, it's a one-size-fits-all policy. The reason we have the parking permits in our housing estates is not so much lack of road space, it's that people have actually chosen. We have the estates that are either near the town centre, near the hospital, or near the tertiary college. And so for the reason for that is to actually stop people actually parking there. Now, once that is eliminated through the parking system, the estate roads it's easy to park on those estate roads. So we haven't got that kind of competition, the picture that's being painted, that it would make people think twice about getting a second or a third permit. Don't really apply in that particular sense, because everybody who needs to park the car in those estates can do so. So given the present circumstances, given the size of last year's surplus, I hear what you say about three months has been given free, which obviously complicates things a bit. But at the end of the day, I don't think an increase would, at the present climate, by all means, let's review it next year. But I'd like to move that we actually freeze the cost of the permits for just one more year. And perhaps when we're much more clear about the financial situation this time next year, we can take a more consideration in terms of an increase.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Egan.
Thank you. Right, well, the members have mentioned what I was going to mention. Other than the permit system, we, as I said, we're in a medieval grid situation. We do not have the luxury of space, and we do not have a luxury of over provision of car parking. So many of our permit systems are woefully oversubscribed for whatever reason. I would like to see us, in the light of the COVID situation, particularly in Saffron Walden, review the amount of permits that have been issued and to encourage reapplication for permits. I do not think that we should be issuing, or whoever does issue the third permit, I don't think we should be considering a third permit in the grid in Saffron Walden, I'm afraid. I know officers may not concur with that, but that would be my view. It is causing huge problems. I do think that, yeah, I do agree that we should look to freeze the permits going forward for the next 12 months.
Richard or Lou, do you want to respond to those three questions?
Unfortunately, the legislation is something of a blunt instrument, isn't it? There's no real middle ground with permits, and the way it works, it charges the resident for a problem that probably isn't of their making. It's people coming into their areas. but the byproduct of that is probably their house is worth a little bit more if they've got a residence permit scheme outside. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. You're right. There's not the road space in these areas, which is why there is the problem. The road doesn't have the capacity to fill for the number of houses, one car per house, for the number of houses per row, particularly in Saffron Walden. It's really tightly packed. I'm not sure that we do particularly issue third permits in any of the places. They're all up for by discretion and on application only. And there was another previous comment about where does most of this income come from. In actual fact, it's Colchester, which has a very, very large residence permit scheme, not only around the town centre in all directions, but also around North Station and also around the hospital as well. The vast majority of the income from residence permits comes from Colchester.
Thank you, Richard. Lou.
It might just to let you know, there's no actually there is no third resident permits that we've been issued in Uttlesford. We've only got first and second permits issued, so there's nobody actually applied for a third permit in the district, Uttlesford district. So just if that helps at all.
Thank you. Which is very much in line with what I was mentioning earlier about the encouragement, the financial encouragement, not to go and buy loads of extra cars and try and park them there. It is understood completely that there are different problems in different areas, and where Uttlesford is very rural, and likewise much of Braintree, Epping Forest is a different kettle of fish completely, as we know from people who were driving to Epping Forest itself, parking on the verge from Cambridge, would you believe, in the middle of the coronavirus lockdown. When we have, to put it mildly, idiots who come into places for leisure when they've been told quite clearly that that's not the best thing to do, a number of people from South London and others when they were then we have to take action, and we've taken temporary action in Epping Forest. We've done the same in Hatfield Forest. We've had to do the same in Mersey with double red lines to stop people abusing the highway and bunging it up where there is other parking. So there's a bit of carrot and there's a bit of stick. The permits are very similar in that. There is a very small increase being proposed for those permits, as you will see, and almost all of them, except for one in Harlow. Sorry, no, actually, my other screen's just decided to go and do some.
Those highlighted in red are the prices.
Yeah, the ones highlighted in red, exactly. So that's basically all the first permits are staying where they are. It's the second permits that are looking for a small increase. There's not, we also, and this is part of the digital offering, there is the ability to share use. We need to manage the road space so that the waste trucks and ambulances and stuff can get through when the need arises. Getting people, and most of it is also dealing with antisocial people who choose, especially in Epping. We know full well that there are lots of people from Harlow who drive to Epping because a Harlow season ticket is £4,000 and a underground season ticket is £2,000. Well, most of us would do exactly the same thing. But the trouble is they end up parking in Epping and bunging it up for the residents. So we have our other option. So we have to put in some form of restriction. It's either a restriction, a commuter parking type restriction, which tends to be a 1 hour restriction in the middle of the day, which is another restriction that hasn't been enforced in the last few months for the same reason as Richard mentioned with the parking areas. We know that people are staying at home, and so therefore they're not going to be commuting. So we have the opportunity in bespoke areas to put in for business parking, for instance, knowing that a number of people will have driven to work, and we have the data to prove that. And then we can offer the space to those people who might either want to commute or to be working locally, so that the parking is still available, but there has to be a small charge to be able to administer that. And doing it digitally is certainly the best way of dealing with that. We have a number of options and examples of that around the bazaars. But as I mentioned earlier on, parking is not free. There is always the option for districts to consider more off-street parking. Now, whether that is going to be required, we really don't know exactly the real impact of COVID. What we're obviously trying to do in most of the town centres at the moment from a highways point of view is to improve the walking and cycling options. And we will get onto park and pedal instead of park and ride, where people will drive to the car park, to the park and ride car park, and cycle healthily, safer and greener into the cities, into the towns, I should say, plus Junctions, of course, which counts as a city. So this is across the piece in Essex, and it does seem to work pretty well. The other side of it is, of course, especially in a number of the places around Epping and in the deeper parts, got the opportunity, haven't got enough front garden space to apply for drop curb and bit curb and be able to put one of their vehicles on there. We can't put conditions, for instance, on a property, a very small, in line with what we had previously agreed, increase being proposed, but only for the second permits. The average, well, actually Braintree is quite, if we're looking at them, so cost is being at £3, certainly for this year. Harlow £5, sorry, tendering £5, Huttlesford 1, and Epping 3. It is an increase, but it's not a very big one. So let's see what. Has anybody else got any further comments on that?
I might just say, Chairman,
yeah.
When I read the agenda before I came, I really didn't have any objection to it, but I was quite impressed by the way Michael put his comments in saying that we never quite know what's going to happen when people come out of COVID. They're going to be stymied for jobs and all sorts of things. And since, as you yourself say, these aren't very big increases, it does seem to me, after listening to the comment, that perhaps if we made no increase this year and froze the charges, then that's the North Essex Parking Partnership's contribution to the return to normality on behalf of all our elected residents, as well as just ourselves as a partnership. So really, I must be honest, I have changed my mind and I'm going to support the freeze that was proposed.
Right, well, first of all, Councillor Danvers, you repeat your proposal, please, and then we'll vote on that. Sorry, I've got you as well.
I think it's aimed at the financial year, if I'm correct, that we actually freeze them, and then this time next year we actually review the situation. If it is a significant loss, then clearly we'll have to address that. But we'll also know, with so much unemployment now and so many difficulties that we're going to come into, it's such a sensitive area for those residents that are actually involved. They're already up in arms about having to pay for parking permits. So to actually discover for their relatives and friends that there's going to be an increase, there's going to be something that's unpalatable, particularly in the present climate.
Okay, Councillor Lilly, you had a point.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Actually, I take the completely opposite view of Councillor Danvers in that, and I would agree with the charges in there, mainly because if we want a society that isn't car dependency, there's no good rewarding people for having more cars by having cheaper parking. We need to cut down on the cars on our streets. And in Colchester, you heard today that there's a lot more people in Colchester have resident permit parking, and we're happy to keep the prices as proposed. What we would like to see is, as the chairman described, more different schemes where cycling and other use is rewarded by cheaper parking, and we're looking at helping shops out by having cheaper parking offers, but this has to be paid for. And I believe that for people to encourage people to come into the towns, to use the shops, the businesses, somebody has to pay for that. And those people who have 2 or 3 cars, there's no need for it, and they should pay for it. I have to admit, if we have the same price as Harlow did, 43 quid, that we'll be quite happy to keep it as it is. That's not even £1 a week for a year to park in on the streets. So I'm happy for the proposals as they are, and I propose that we accept them as put out in the agenda, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lee. I think what we have to do first, though, from a democratic point of view, is we have to look at the other proposal. And we need a seconder to Councillor Danvers's suggestion, motion. Councillor Avey is seconding that for your record. So we will need to vote on the. Ian Taylor, you were raising your hand earlier. I don't know whether that's you meant to, or
yes, I was trying to contribute to the debate. I wasn't going to suggest freezing prices or get involved in that level of detail. I just thought it might be helpful to put a bit of background on this, in that the general aim, because partnership goes back nearly 10 years now, and the original aim was to try and unify.
Excuse me, Chair. Is it appropriate that an officer actually participates in this debate?
In this particular case, Ian has been an earlier member, adopter, and has been a very useful officer to a number of items in tendering. So I'm happy to take.
I quite accept that, Chair. I quite accept that, Chair, but we're having a political debate now.
That's absolutely fine. We can continue with that very shortly.
Yeah, I've no intention of joining in any politics. This is just to recap on the facts of the way that the partnership started out. And I think the permits were agreed to try and be unified at the time, because when the partnership was set up, there were real genuine concerns about whether it would ever break even or would ever have income. Over the years, we've now come to a position of these healthy surpluses, which has been a hallmark of the success of the partnership. And probably it is an opportune time to look at the politics or the policies behind the permit setting, because we followed this process of increasing them all along as given right from the very off, because that's how it was set out on the original policy, was to try and uniform them all to the same level as Uttlesford ultimately. That was the original aim. It's gone very slowly because some authorities had much lower permit prices than others, as you can still see. So that was the principle behind it. I just think now that's possibly changed because of the financial position, and it would be a good opportunity for members, to ask for a piece of work to be done, analysing what permits means to certain areas, what the income levels are, what their rationale is for introducing permits, because they're all different. Councillor Lilly's quite right. He's got his policies in Colchester. In tendering, really, with our residence permits come about because people who normally can live quite happily suddenly can't get near their home for about 10 weeks in the summer. So it's a very different type of balance. So it would be a very useful and interesting piece of work to do, and I just think that that's a contribution the officers could perhaps make.
As you say, the original intention was to unify the cost of permits and bring them up to the level of UDC, then I'm quite happy for us to reduce ours and let you all catch up.
Well, sorry about this.
I'll make an observation that it wasn't to bring them to the price of UDCs, but it was to bring them to £70, which at the time the partnership was formed was considered to be the cost to make them break even.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. I think we've got to a point where we can have a vote on the amended or Councillor Danvers' proposal, which has been seconded by Councillor Ike, as to those who would like to see a freeze in the potential parking increases. I should point out that we have a sustainable agenda that we need to run. And as a commissioner of the Essex Climate Action Commission, I am keen to see a more environmental public transport, cycling and walking way forward than to encourage large cars to be parking all over the place, even though that's the situation we've got temporarily. Councillor Danvers, very quickly.
I agree with the environmental argument, absolutely. There's no question of that. But that's an entirely different matter. With respect to Mike and with respect to you, I think it's erroneous to actually start talking about that without actually thinking of much, much bigger picture of local authorities, and particularly Essex County Council, facilitating the ability of people to cycle to work and to walk to work. At the moment, we have a fantastic cycleway network in Harlow. The only thing is that it's completely riven with potholes, and cyclists are very reluctant to use it half the time because of those problems. So yes, I agree with the environmental. If we're actually having a different policy of trying to price the car out like Cambridge, then I accept that. And I think local authorities need to actually go down that debate. At the moment, we're talking about individual housing estates, which through no fault of their own, have other people coming into their areas, and therefore that we have to actually stop that and restrict people, commuters, actually doing that. And that's not really, therefore, the environment argument, although very important, is not really relevant to this particular argument, in my opinion.
That's certainly a point well made. But yes, in Harlow, I haven't got any proposed increases anyway, except for the following year. I'd like to have a vote now, please, for those in favour of the Councillor Danvers's proposal to freeze permit prices for the next, well, as they are basically, for 1 year. Can I have a show of hands visually on the screen, please, for those people who wish to to freeze permit prices for 1 year? 1, 2, 3. Councillor Danvers, are you voting for it? I can see your mouth moving.
Yes, I've indicated, Chair.
Yeah, okay, no, your hand was so close to the screen that it was difficult to know whether you're putting a hand up or trying to change your mute.
Oh, I see. I put the blue hand up. Sorry.
No, right. Okay. That's why I was saying on the screen in front of the camera. Sorry. That's absolutely fine. So that is 4 in favour. Yes, Councillor Avey, Councillor Eek, Councillor Danvers, and Councillor Talbot, and those against. So that is a 4 to 3. And so the Councillor Danvers's proposition is found, and we will therefore find ourselves freezing the prices. It'd be interesting to have, if you could, a report certainly ready for next meeting, or maybe as an emailed around, just to show what the expected change to finances might be. I think the problem about that is that we don't really know what's going to be happening over the next year or so. There is going to be a new normal, and we will find, I believe, a number of parking restrictions may need to be looked at for amendment that we've put in over the last 5 years or so. But we will have to wait until things settle down, and nobody knows when that's going to happen. Councillor Avey, you were indicating, I thought you were voting, but if you were wanting to say something, then please do. You're muted.
All I was going to say, Chairman, is I very much appreciate your drive for the environmental brief. I do agree with it, but unfortunately, in my portfolio, I am dealing with the here and now, and the here and now is still maximum car. And I think central government really has to direct us away from the car, and it's not just going to be piecemeal by individual authorities. There's going to have to be some form of push to get rid of cars by probably taxation. But I think at the moment, as I say, I'm dealing with the here and now, and the here is there's problems with parking, it's expensive, and my residents are unhappy most of the time about it.
Okay, well, we can, as I think we'll find ourselves notifying the public quite soon about this proposal. It can be good news as well as bad news. It's good news in that we're helping support people post-COVID. It may have an impact on surpluses. We actually don't really know. So I'm happy to complete this piece of the meeting. Are we all okay on that, Richard? Sorry, sorry.
Yeah, it's just something I forgot to say. I mirror what you say about the environmental issues. I just hope that Essex will come up with some good cycle paths for the rest of the district and interconnecting between the conurbations too, so that we do have a viable alternative. The other thing I've missed saying is I wanted to congratulate NEPP, in particular Richard, on his swift response and you know, the sensitive way in which they have handled, or we have handled, the not enforcing and allowing people to park at home during this crisis. I think you've done a wonderful job, and residents are very appreciative.
Thank you for that.
Very nice comment. Thank you very much. And it is appreciated, I think, amongst all the partners. That has been some really good work going on, despite shielding of a number of CEOs, which in some cases is still happening. And of course, the rapid work that we've done in both Epping, Uttlesford from the point of view of Hatfield Forest, and in Colchester, Mersey, to get these red line schemes that are now about to, what have we got, 4 days before they go live, to basically address the fools, rather sadly, and we'll see how that works as well. Let's move on to the annual report. Richard.
So annual report
page 89 on the PDF, if that's
page 81.
81 on the paper version.
Scroll through to that, so I give you a bit of an introduction. Thanks for the words on that. We're a partnership, of course, and we're just trying to do what's right. I'm keeping a very close eye on the travel to work stats that come from government as well, and June's have been, well, the middle of June's been published today. There's around about half the people who are still working from home, and like all of us in NEPP, the management team has upped and left and is now working from home as well. So we just recognised very, very early on, and amongst a number of other more national meetings, that was the right thing to do. Anyway, on to parking annual report data. This is one of the things where we normally present you a large table of PCNs and things, but unfortunately that's one of the things we've had to bump as a result of the emergency. There's just not been time with changing around the way the service works every couple of 3 days to get these stats out. But in the report there is a link, and that's where we publish our annual reports. We've been publishing them in advance by the quarter for a long time, and successful in winning an award during the last year. And I've nominated us for an award again this year. I don't think we're going to get a day out to receive congratulations or be runners up this year, but nonetheless, I put it in once more. To be accompanied by a video, of course, it tells people the need for parking controls and the reasons behind them. So the data will be produced. We have to do it within 6 months of the close of the financial year. We'll produce it in our normal way, which is our slightly more accessible style of annual report, and we'll go onto that link there that I've included in the report, and you'll get the whole table of statistics to accompany it. There's been no dramatic changes, so it's just a gradual change in the number of PCNs. Number of PCNs issued isn't a very good measure, to be fair. We're really looking for a compliance figure rather than PCNs issued. By itself, a big number by itself doesn't really represent anything particularly. And with the gradual creep and having more and more restrictions out there, I'd expect more and more PCNs to be issued, but it hasn't increased dramatically. So we need to delay the publication of that PCN table, that's a company's report, but it will be online and available as soon as we possibly can.
Thank you. Any comments?
Note the report.
Everybody happy with that? To note the report. Thank you. Don't see any dissent there. Richard, we're back with you from point of view of restrictions, junction protection, 3PR, etc., etc.
We are. So we've now moved on to page 83, if you'd like to find that in the pack. It's
91 on the PDF. There we go.
Okay. I see where you are, yes. So I mentioned earlier on that parking very quickly becomes really complicated. And if we're struggling to try and explain that to people and why there's the need for controls, then I can't imagine the difficulty that public sometimes have with the complexity of the things. So the report here tries to set out some of the ways we want to reduce complexity. There's a much longer report that's behind this, and also our thinking over the COVID emergency measures, which I'll circulate around you, and you can read at your leisure, called our Road to Recovery plan, which has been circulated nationally as part of our positive parking agenda work, and with a few others, and the county and the client office have seen it as well. And it's sort of behind the push for doing things a slightly different way and trying to demystify things. So regards to this report, it falls into two parts really. One part is about restrictions and the other part is a brief update on our 3PR scheme, and I hope you'll see how one starts to support the other as we go through. Firstly, we're looking to make the introduction of schemes easier by slotting in a new division of restrictions, if you like, which I've mentioned there. There's 5 points that are mentioned under paragraph 3.2 there. We previously had just 4. Safety and congestion, which rest with the county council and their policies, and new development, which was linked to new developments and was administered by the county council. And then you'll be aware of the 6 schemes per year that we've been able to fund, partly through that surplus money that we've get, and part for any socially necessary type schemes, 6 per district per year, which are able to put in and resolve the smaller problems that probably we just would never get to in the general run of business. And that was one of the things that NEPP was set up to try and resolve. There's quite a long other list of things that we'd like to do as well, and it's not really fair to put some of the restriction type schemes through those 6 per year limit that you get. So to open up a bit more space in your socially necessary lists, I propose that we put in this new level, level 4, just above that, where we can put in ParkSafe restrictions and any other restrictions that score sufficiently high to be able to be processed and to be done as soon as we possibly can. So those new restrictions, we hope to make them clearer by showing where you can or can't park. We're adopting red routes, as you'll see, and the emergency has hastened our thinking a little bit about that. And thirdly, to implement schemes that back up the 3PR work that we're doing in cases where we need approved devices from that project that we've already had to help streamline our patrols and our enforcement, and therefore take some of the cost out of doing that as well. Everybody thinks that the parking patrols and enforcement thing is just a license to print money, and I can assure you it certainly is not. So the report sets out those actions for a decision, and it updates members on the 3PR scheme and the associated measures that can be taken. We can already do those Division 4 restrictions between myself and Councillor Mitchell with delegations that already exist, and I just wanted to formalise that and say how we'd approach doing a bit more of that. Now we can be a bit more free with using the reserve to cover off some of the things that we don't need to put through your 6 per district limit. So there we are.
Comments, please. No, it seems that everybody's happy as standbys. Councillor Eag.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, Appendix B, the example of the red route happened to be around a Dunmow school, which has been a problem area for some time, and it looks really good for the residents around there, because they're the ones that complain most. Not so good for the parents of the children trying to drop them off. We have a huge issue, as you know, in the car park, and I'm just concerned that, you know, the introduction of these red routes, how much of this is going to be done to towns like Dunmow, and how much will Dunmow and Uttlesford be able to participate in the decision-making process as to where these are going to be installed. And for others, I just want to point out there is an in and an out for this particular school, which unfortunately has not been used for some time. There is an alternative solution here where we could have a drop-off within the school grounds and an exit on the other. And I'd like to explore that rather than just have a draconian red line route.
Yes, this is an example, and in many cases where there are schools that have zigzags, yellow zigzags, you'll be familiar with those, I'm sure, school keep clears, they are timed so that as a red route would be, but one of the problems is both maintenance, because you will note that yellow zigzags get scrubbed relatively quickly, and there's rather a lot of paint that goes with them. A red line restriction would be significantly better value, but also a bit more obvious to people. It's a little bit like flicking two fingers. It's quite obvious that you shouldn't park there because people don't. It's also better to enforce, or easier to enforce, theoretically, via other methods than observation. But Richard, I'm sure you'd be able to answer that more comprehensively.
All the time, we're looking to put in measures to back up the 3PR schemes that are already there. So I think this school has got one of those 3PR, and if it hasn't, then it certainly should have. Yeah, so we need to look at backing that up with some other work around the safety angles to make sure that the 3PR scheme is used properly. Now, as you rightly say, residents keep contacting us with issues outside schools, and we can only do so much. If I send patrolling officers there at the moment, I have to send 2 because of the nature of the thing. I have 303 schools in the patch. Not all of them have got an entrance onto a road, and not all of them have got a safety issue, but you get the scale of the thing. And I have 41 officers to send, some of whom aren't on duty at that time. So doubling them up, that's 20 shifts at the very most that I can do. 303 schools to get round. The maths is, it's impossible to get everywhere
in a very limited period.
No, indeed. And the use of cameras on red routes is really going to make a big difference there. Firstly, we'd hope that these things to become self-policing. I mean, there's not very much further that you'd need to walk away from the piece of road that's not as safe there to go and park in some of the other areas, or use some of the 3PR scheme measures that we've helped to introduce to provide an alternative. So we're trying to lead people to use the alternatives, and where people still won't, then I'm afraid some other measures need to be put in. And they're very clear, the red routes, if you've seen any of them. And I say we're trying to simplify things and make them clearer all the time. So you just can't park outside the school. That's where we're trying to get to.
It's very much encouraging the walk or cycle to school, or possibly pedal scoot to school, rather than being dumped right outside the school gates in the 4x4.
The other thing we don't know,
convenient to the parents.
The thing we don't know when schools start to return, and it's likely to be September, we understand at the moment, is where the start and end times are going to be rescheduled, so that classes don't clash quite so much. So there may be more continual dropping off and collection for a time as well. But we just need to take that on board as we start to design some of these schemes as well. They're just some ideas for the sorts of places that we'd had issues with in the past, as you've identified.
And the other reassurance is absolutely there would be discussion with the district. No question. Yeah, this is not a NEPP. As a partnership, it isn't done like that. We very much want to have the involvement of officers and members in the appropriate districts.
That was the crux of the question, how much discussion and involvement in the placing of these routes would be by negotiation, etc. I mean, as we do at the moment in terms of schemes that are put forward by local residents or by town councils or parish councils.
Yeah, the consultation will take place.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments from members? No, I think that looks very good. Thank you. Let's note that. What's our duty to do on this one? Is that noting again?
To note the progress and to decide to adopt that new fourth category, fourth tier category, Chair.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. So we've got the, I've got them on the screen anyway. Is everybody happy with that?
Yes.
And hands up. Thank you very much indeed. So we move on to page 99 on the PDF. Restrictions, etc.
A little introduction around where we're at with these. I mean, obviously we a bit unsure about where the finances of the whole thing have gone or are going to. We know that the whole COVID emergency could have cost us around about £500,000. I mentioned that 286 will go a long way to filling that gap, and we may have to take a little bit out of our reserve funding to fill any other, and depending on how we go from here. And of course, we've got the residence parking extensions and the other bits and pieces to fund within that we've accounted for. So we're looking at whether we need to have a look at any of the other controls in place around our projects. And I hope it won't be the case, but we've already seen that we need to review the timelines in some of these projects. The schools one quite well fits with the people returning to school in September. We would have been starting to install some of the camera sites by June, in fact, so around about now, but we're setting that back for consultation during the summer to be implemented for September and the new school terms. Some of the other projects as well, we've had to set back some of the bits, but we have been pressing on as far as we possibly can with looking at how we can progress things. But we've been working quite carefully with the client officers, and the whole of the background of this report, we've worked really closely with client officers to find out whether the schemes that we've got in for projects that are planned are the right things still in the circumstances that have changed. And I mentioned people working from home there and keeping an eye on the statistics of what motorists are doing as well. I think the ONS, National Statistics Office, reckon that about 48% of people who would have commuted before are still working from home, in fact. So things are slightly changed from how we were before when we were looking at making decisions. But just set that as a background against which we put this together. I say I'll circulate our wider road to recovery document after this, and you can have a look at that at your leisure. But just hand over to Jason if you've got any more points about the report here.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Yeah, so nothing really much further to add, to be honest with you. Yeah, as I say, been in touch with the client officers regarding the projects that were approved, just to double check that there's still appetite to pursue those projects. I think by and large, the answer is yes on the majority of those. Working with Epping with regard to one of the deferred schemes, which was the St John's Road development that's ongoing there. So again, there's a piece of work to understand exactly what that requirement will be, if it is still a requirement. But yeah, but aside from that, there's not really much to add. The updates are within the report themselves. Happy to take any questions that anyone's got with regard to any of the individual projects, but it'll take a while if I go down all of them. But yeah, so that's about it.
That's right.
Thank you. UDC, Crafton Green and Lower Street car park extensions. There's an item there, which I think it's on page 94 on my PDF anyway. And the comment there is no further information to support this for consideration by the committee has been received at this stage. I think there has been a lot of correspondence going backwards and forwards, and as far as I'm aware, officers have given chapter and verse on the payback from the additional parking bays that would be provided under these two schemes. So I'm not quite sure what this comment means. I don't know what else you're waiting for to be able to approve this.
certainly the emails that have landed in my inbox, my apologies. I've not had time to progress any of those any further than the point to which we got before the COVID emergency. I've been busy reorganising the service every couple of 3 days, so apologies that's not made it to Jason to get into this report. If I can give a summary of it, if you'd like me to, we were discussing whether the payback should be nothing or some or 100%, or whether the schemes could in fact pay for themselves by raising the tariff, and then whether or not we'd still need to build anything Tuttlesford to accommodate commuter parking or any other thing going forward. So that's the point at which I've got to it, and I'm afraid I've not had any chance to progress any further.
Thank you.
So we're work in progress on that, but if you wouldn't mind coming back to us as soon as possible with the any information that's required further to that which has already been submitted, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
And Councillor Van Darken, thank you. You're muted, Richard.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Richard, CBC Manor Road, Colchester, up-to-date quote for refurbishment of this area. Is this somewhere you're going to move to? I don't, it's not very clear, well, not at all clear what this is about.
Okay, I can expand on that if you'd like me to.
Please.
Towards the end of Manor Road, which is within one of Colchester's residence parking schemes, there's a piece of ground that's behind a multi-storey car park. You can't get to it from within the car park, and it's not intended to add it into the car park. But it's really a piece of waste ground that's been used for various different things, sort of attached onto the side of the car park. I think we've had porta cabins in there for road improvement schemes with the bridge over Balkan Hill. We've had a porta cabin with some offices in there for shop mobility, and those things have all moved off to different sites. And the site's been left vacant now, and would probably comprise up to about 6 bays or something like that. Now, we've suggested that we could make provision for an EV bay in there to save having to take an EV bay out of the residence parking area, which is already oversubscribed. The St Mary's area behind the car park is very, very full, and to provide some other sorts of parking in there. It's a piece of ground that just needs a bit of improvement to bring it up to the standard to be used for parking on, and would alleviate some of the issues with residence parking around the back of the car park there. So it's not a car park, but a piece of residence parking area really.
Not a big car park, but it's got some of the car park concrete in it. I think there are a couple of points that I wanted to note, specifically the parking bay sensors, which we're really looking forward to. They've been slightly delayed, I think, because there's a Section 50 license required for operations in the highway, etc., etc. So Essex will be effectively installing these. What the Section 50 is, in layman's terms, as I understand it, have to be corrected, is that if you are plonking something into the highway, then that is part of, it should be part of the highway authority. But if you want to plug something into the highway, then you can get permission to do so. But you need to tell them exactly where you want to put it. And we don't know exactly where we want to put 1,000 parking bay sensors. What we do need to know is we need to put them in, mark where they are, and then sort out the Section 50, which is the wrong way around in the normal scheme of things. But we're working very well with County Council and the Section 50 or the 50 section licence.
A little update for that as well.
Yeah,
I think contractually we've been able to resolve that as well. Ringway Jacobs is contractors to the County Council. County Council are going to purchase these things with NEPP's County Council money, which it is. So County Council spending County Council's money just held by NEPP. But the quirk of the thing is, of course, the NEPP money is held in a Colchester account. So we've got to get it from one place to the other. With NEPP, for that read, Colchester as the lead authority being party to the agreement. So we've been round the block a couple of times with the legal agreements, and we seem to have resolved it to the satisfaction of all and can now leverage the money for Essex to buy the things, which also means that we won't need 1,000 Section 50 licenses as well, because they will be Essex's sensors.
So that's going to be an interesting project. Certainly the amount of data it will provide over parking. So it's very much in line with some of the comments that were made by members This is going to start in Clacton. Is it about 600 in Clacton and 400 in Colchester?
Yeah,
Where
correct.
sort of we can get an idea of what really goes on the seafront in Clacton, but with real data that will not only inform us about where people park when, but will also inform other connected vehicles. Sorry about that. Other connected vehicles, that there is parking space available on the seafront, for instance. So that's part of the sort of digital, again, another part of the digital agenda that really will push this forward. So looking forward to seeing that. And the school cameras, we've also had a look at the possibility of using those, although it's not going to work, but to remind Essex County Council that where NEPP is we are partners as well as part of the parking partnership. But as an offshoot of the County Council business, there are skills that help with things like CCTV and possible considering looking at what's going on in the town centres where people are not following the guidelines that they're trying to do through the safer walking and cycling. So there are lots of flexibilities going and bouncing between the different authorities, which is very positive because it keeps people on their toes. I'm not saying that Richard's meant to be standing on his toes, but still. This is a report to note. If anybody has any other comments, please show or wishes to make comments.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll note progress. Thank you very much indeed. Right. Richard, Park and Ride.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just a little bit aware that the time has crept around to nearly 3 o'clock. Is everybody still all right as we start to look at these last couple of reports? Nearly there now. So page 95, we're all right. Park and Ride, we've been doing a little bit of work in partnership with the Park and Ride in Colchester. We carried out some works to implement our My Permit there to deal with some off-bus ticketing, updated some signages and helped with some processes there, and also helped to build that into a new scheme we've got called like an umbrella. The British Parking Association has called Park Active, where we're trying to repurpose the way long stay car parks work to work in with the Park and Pedal that Councillor Mitchell mentioned earlier on, and Park and Walk from town centre nearby car parks, where it probably take you as long to drive into the centre as it would to park there and walk in. So we're trying to encourage those who can to do things in a slightly different way and free some of the highway space up for others, particularly at the time when it's a bit more difficult to use public transport at the moment. So we've been doing a bit of work with the Park and Ride there, and we just wanted to formalise this and bring this along to the parking partnership to say what has been going on and let you know we've been covering some patrols and operational issues now. We've had traffic order put in there, car parks order, to restrict the parking, just using the parking for parking as it should be used for the stadium, or parking and riding either a bicycle or a bus into town, and prohibiting the other things. So a small amount of income and a small amount of expenditure, and a facilitating partnership with the county council there.
If I could also mention, of course, the county have responded to the DFT on e-scooters, which many will know are actually illegal in this country to be used on the highway, and have made response to the Department of Trade, Department of Transport, in line with many of the other European nations that do allow these e-scooters. These are traditional push-push scooters, but with a battery underneath it to make it go along. They can be travelling along quite merrily. They could be on pavements, they could be on the road, but our proposal is along the lines of people with driving licenses should use them if they're going on the highway. So this is not a kiddie thing. This is more a sustainable commuting thing. So the Park and Pedal, and the Park and Scoot, Park and Ride, etc., are the options for that sort of thing. And I know that Colchester, for instance, in the parking strategy update, is looking at some of the, well, Rowan House is a good example of a car park that is currently got a little bit of tumbleweed blowing over it. So if you parked your car there and then scooted into the middle of the town, you wouldn't bung up the middle of the town much and improve the congestion and the emissions and all the rest of it. So loads of connected bits that are looking really positive in conjunction with the responses that the County Council have been putting back to government. Councillor Lilly.
Yes, I totally agree. It sort of fits in with our the policies that we've got bringing in, the total change in Colchester as the congestion is really bad. And you mentioned Rowan House, which is the council offices, because no one works there anymore. So we've got a proposal going that we'll be turning that council car park into a public car park at the weekend, and that they could. It's outside of the town centre, so they'll be able to park in there at a probably slightly cheaper rate and walk into town. It's quite a good initiative, and as you said, there's a massive hill next to it, so maybe some of those electric scooters will be able to go up there quite easily. I might get one myself, actually. That's good. It's a good positive scheme with the park and ride, and
Don't say any more.
Yeah.
So, any other comments on noting that?
No.
Councillor, and then Councillor Van Arken.
Thank you. Interesting to hear those comments from Councillor Lilly. Uttlesford have actually opened their council car park up for a number of years over the weekends, free of charge. Keep traffic out of the town centre. It's a great idea. I just wanted to know, you mentioned, Richard, this was a little bit of expenditure, a little bit of an income. Are there any figures? Is this meant to be break even? What's the finance situation going forward?
In the same as everything else, a few patrols, the money from that to break even, and the My Permit system that we put in to cover its own costs from what we're doing there. I don't foresee this being a great drain on the parking partnership at all.
Or a great money spinner.
You will keep an eye on those costs, and we can judge those from time to time to see whether this is going to be a viable position.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah. And of course, it works in with the general strategy of getting people into Colchester in different ways as well.
And we're going to be looking at exactly the same sort of thing in Chelmsford. Councillor Van Darken.
Thank you. Richard, am I to understand from this, and forgive me if I should know this, but that the Colchester Park and Ride belongs to Essex County Council? I hadn't appreciated that. Thank
Yes,
you.
That's correct. Sorry, yes, yeah. So our other partner in the joint agreement is Essex County Council, who runs the Park and Ride scheme.
And it was resulted from a fairly quick cessation of the previous contract, didn't it? That wasn't working very well, and Richard and the team were able to step in to almost make a seamless change of payment method, which otherwise could have been a little bit embarrassing.
One of those sorts of things that simplifies things again for people. If you've got the My Permit app already, then you might have through parking elsewhere. You just use that for parking here as well.
Exactly. Right. I know I'm aware that we are just past 3 o'clock. If members are happy, we've got just this and the forward plan to go. So if we're happy, we'll continue. Otherwise, I would propose a 5-minute water stop, if that was acceptable. If 5 minutes is long enough for those people who need. What are the opinions? Can I have hands up for just continuing?
Oh, I think that's unanimous, Mr. Chairman.
Let's crack on. Thank you.
Take as little time explaining the next one as we possibly can then, which is a strategic positioning report, which is myself again on page 97 now. This is about the future beyond NEPP. We have an agreement to carry on until the 31st of March 2022. And passage of time, this is only just around the corner. Barely any time since Christmas, doesn't it? And already we're in the middle of the year now. So another 18 months to 2 years' time, we'll be looking at a future operating model for something after North and South Essex parking partnerships. And in order to keep innovating, we've been looking at different models and different themes for the way we can keep investing into the services that we've done, whilst we might take on a few other things as well. We've discussed at some considerable length with the client officers the merits of the current parking partnership operation, the things it's good at, the things it can innovate, the way it can be improved, and how we can continue to fund things and say the end of the current operation is the end of March 2022. Actually not very far away now at all. So I've proposed a financial model to the county amongst a number of other options, and I've outlined one or two of the other options that were floated about in Appendix B. I think that the colourful table there is the model which has gained most traction, and the rest can now be disregarded. So essentially the NEPP would retain some control over its reserve to start investing in the more innovative technologies and schemes, as we have started and showed that it's possible to do in terms of making yet more efficiencies, something we've been particularly good at in the last 10 years or so. And would like your permission to write to both SEP, our other half of the county's partnership, and Essex County Council to continue along similar lines, but we're in a slightly different position from that which we're in towards the end of 2010, when we're looking at a very, very large deficit indeed. We're financially slightly better off through the work we've all put in. I think each of the partners has had a hand in that, and look to do things differently in light of the way we've changed. So we'd like to pass 300,000 into the new scheme as a bit of a buffer, and the reasons for that were patently obvious. The emergency that we've just gone through, it gives us a buffer against which to keep our operations afloat should the very worst happen, and we've done very well just lately as a result of having something in the bank to help us, and decide our future operating model based on some slight improvements and changes around the way we do, but fundamentally a similar sort of thing to the way we've been going before, which gives partners a say in where the traffic regulation orders go, and the debates that we've had already around permit pricing and some of the other things which would otherwise just be decided at HQ level right across the county on block.
Yeah, just a quick reminder of the history before we started in 2003. Well, we started this in 2011, started in 2008, didn't we? The previous version of this, the overall county deficit was £900,000 a year, was the cost of parking to the public purse. We're in a very different situation now. I'm proud to observe. Are there any comments on this? Councillor Danvers.
Only to say, Chair, that what you just said is absolutely right. When I remember this was set up, there was a sizable deficit. You've just quoted a figure. I thought it was £800,000, but it's irrelevant. It was a sizable deficit, and clearly the system has worked very well. Obviously, with your good counsels, you can actually refer that on to the county council. I'm sure they wouldn't want to actually change a working system.
No, I think you're quite right. Kim, you've popped up, and welcome to have a speak.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, members. As being one of the officers involved from before the inception with Richard and Ian and a few others, yes, it's a testament to how well NEPP has worked, and well done to sort of members, officers, and everyone involved. Just one point, Chair. Officers who were involved and perhaps members who were involved at the inception of NEPP, one of the issues was the deficit or any losses in NEPP being underwritten by individual authorities. So as the agreement currently stands, if NEPP were to go from a surplus to a deficit situation, the share of that would be equally shared among the 6 partners, and they will have to pay for it. And I think it's fair to say that most authorities at the time of formation of NEPP struggled with this. It took a lot of convincing on part of the portfolio holders and officers and presentations to individual councils to explain what was meant, because as you rightly said, the concern was we're moving from a 900,000 loss deficit into a partnership. What if it doesn't work? And of course, county subsidized it, and it wasn't in the first, second, third year that we got out of deficit. Just flagging that up, Chairman, for members and officers' information, and I'm sure Richard's aware of that. This will come up again, especially if any surpluses are to be handed over to county council, because it's a highway authority function that's being delegated to the partnership. And I think Richard's mentioned 300,000. I would just say that because we've got time till 2022, there might be a discussion to be had around what that should be, just in case this COVID gets really bad and we do get into a recession and we get to a stage where instead of giving on the one hand, we're giving county the surplus, and then the following year districts have to, cough up a huge sum to cover any deficit. So I think it's on board. I just wanted to make that point because it was a political issue at the time, and districts were struggling to join in because they were nervous about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any Councillor?
Chair, just mentioning there 1 or 2 minor changes. What are the changes? I can't see them highlighted anywhere. And in Appendix B, there are a whole load of options. What, can you give us a quick update on where we are with all those options?
Yes, I think Appendix B has been included to illustrate the sort of alternatives that there were, and the model that I've illustrated in Appendix A, and I'll come back to what those changes are in a moment, is the one that is the favoured option now. So you can disregard the rest of Appendix B. I think this is option 4 from Appendix B, which has become Appendix A and the preferred way of working. Now, within that table on page 99, if you've got that colourful table, hopefully in the PDF it's come through in colour for you. The services that we've got at the moment are those which are below the dotted line across the middle there. So left to right, there's a black and white dotted line. And the things that are in gold at the bottom are the things that we started out with. We had a small cash flow amount, which is the green box at the bottom, which at the time was 100,000. And so we were facing, well, what was approaching £1 million and beyond. Had we not made the efficiencies we'd made, it would have gone well over £1 million deficit by now. After a number of years, having had a bit of revenue support for our traffic regulation order function for the maintenance and creation of new schemes there, we had a 250,000 backlog fund and 150,000 revenue fund per year. That support disappeared in 2016, and we took on the entire financial liability for all of that. That's the red box that you see there. So at the moment as we sit, everything below the dotted line is that which NEPP supports from its income. Hence really the importance of considering the budget very carefully and making the permits pay for their operation, knowing where our income comes from, knowing the exact cost of things that we do. Those things that I mentioned in the reports earlier on. Onto the differences then, and you can see a small arrow on the left-hand side that talks about the operating surplus. So after we've considered the things that we just would have done in our report there about projects, which are in the sort of the darker gold box, we might be able to be agreeable with the county council to hand some things back to the county council in some other projects which should come from them. And maybe they might make some investment back to us. So those are the boxes across the middle there. So where there's some things that the county council wants to inject by way of new parking at the curbside perhaps, or some other schemes that the county council wants to pass over to us. I don't know, bus lanes is a possible example, or one or two of the disabled bays as another example.
Yeah.
Yep, so they could be funded and passed into the operation. So those are a couple of the differences there. What we do with the sort of super surplus and what we might do to change the way our operation works and the elements that comprise it. And then on the far right hand side, the boxes in green was a suggestion that came from a couple of the client officers to invest in areas in district councils. And we've started to do this with the report you approved earlier on, where we highlighted that there are things that we need just to be getting on with because it's the right thing to do. In Epping Forest area, for example, can't build any new car parks because a lot of the land is in the Greenbelt area and so on, planning restrictions, but we could help prime some new development with work on the highway, where that might bring an income back into the parking partnership through an investment. So it's a circular loop there. And there are other places we can think of across the partnership where similar sorts of things would be enabled. So it's just taking what we've got and trying to make a bit more of in the way we added the red box onto the side of our operation, what other things can we add into the operation? And what other ways can we start to prime other bits and pieces that could be of mutual benefit, a virtuous circle, if you like. And then if we have a super surplus left over, which we just can't spend for one reason or another, I'm sure the county council might have some other ways of suggesting the ways that it could put that to good use. through the Section 55 activities, through environmental schemes and the like. So there's a bit of an illustration of the changes that I was talking about. I'm happy to speak to you separately if you want a bit more information on the way we're thinking of going there. But this gives us about 18 months or so to agree a new way forward, if we're all agreed that this is the way we want to pursue to go.
Thank you. Right, now I've got to find the right bit of this screen that's being shared. Have we got any? There we go. I probably need to stop sharing that thing. Right, that's better. So any further comments? Councillor Dalkin.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Richard. I think I got my head around that. We'll have a look at it with a cold towel around my head. But am I right in thinking that at some stage, or you know, we have been seriously thinking about taking the partnership outside of Essex to Suffolk? I guess would be the obvious one.
Yes, I've been fortunate to do a little bit of work with both Baber, in whose district I reside, and from where I'm speaking to you now, Baber in South Suffolk and Mid Suffolk. We've done a little bit of consultancy work with them to tide them over, as some of you might know. CP, the decriminalised parking scheme, civil parking enforcement, has recently begun in Suffolk, and they have engaged us on more of a consultancy basis to help set up some of their scheme and system. So a little bit of income has come into the partnership by doing a bit of consultancy work there. Yes, that's also happened. As it happens, our My Permit scheme invented here has now moved over the border into to Suffolk as well, and can be used there. Same app. So there's the Traffic Management Act, which is the primary legislation under which we work, encourages local authorities to work together in the way we've been doing, and with our neighbours as well. So I've been talking to Norfolk quite a lot as well, with some reviews of their services they've been looking at, and compared the way our operation works with theirs, and Gloucestershire at the time. And also we talked to Nick, who's my counterpart in South Essex, very, very frequently indeed, and some of the other authorities around. I say we've done a little bit of work outside with Suffolk. They're setting up their sort of formative partnership in Suffolk, not quite the same way that we are with the Joint Committee, but you know, it's early days for them yet, and I wouldn't like to be starting up in the middle of a global emergency such as this, with yeah, the amounts of money they've got to find to make that work. But there's a challenge in itself, and perhaps in the future there's ways that we can help them out again with some of the ideas that we've got for doing things a bit differently.
1st of April 2020 was not the best day for decriminalising your parking. Okay, Councillor Oak.
We're not being asked to make the decision today. Obviously, this is something for the 31st of March 2022 to make final.
I hope we'll be making it a bit before that.
Yeah, okay. But it would be nice to have a bit more information about this. So thank you, Richard, for the offer of you know, more detailed discussion. I mean, the bit that I'm worried about is this surplus to CC rather than back into the partnership for you know, more projects and more affordable projects. And maybe even, you know, a little line going off somewhere funding cycling lanes and things like that, you know, so that we can bring in our environmental credentials into this partnership. So good start, but I think we've got a lot of thinking and discussing to do before we get to that point.
I think the decision here is our general direction of travel. Do we want to carry on with the partnership and enable us to write to both South and to Essex to say this is the direction we want to go in, rather than any other directions?
Yeah, get back to county is. I don't think it would be that. I don't think anybody would think that that was a sensible thing to do. So are all members happy with the general position direction of travel, which we will be fine tuning, I'm sure, in the next year, because thank you very much. We will be needing to make that decision, I would suggest, in either this time next year or next October, probably.
If we're all agreed, I'll write to Nick Binder in the South, his committee, to consider the same thing. I think he's been waiting for one or other of us to make some recommendations, and also to the county. I'll write to both of those then with our recommendations in the way that we set about starting to look at making that decision.
Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, could I just get clarification? We've got the decision made there on 1.1. For 1.2, could I just ask for the benefit of the minutes if members are agreeing to that too?
That relates to the options in Appendix B not being the ones we'd like to progress with, but our illustration in Appendix A, which was some NEPP proposals put to the County Council, as opposed to the other way around, as being the way forward.
Okay, that's as we're recording it, then that covers that completely. So if members are happy, then we can ask for both 1.1 and 1.2 to be, well, 1.2 specifically is the decision, isn't it, to be the new operating model. Can I ask for a show of hands, so everybody in favour? Yep, I think we're all there.
So, Mr. Chairman, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now it's open to you, Owen.
I think, have we got item 17, an update on obstructive parking?
Ah, yes, absolutely. That's hiding somewhere, isn't it?
Yes, it's hiding because it's verbal.
Yep.
This will be very, very short. You'll be pleased to. There's been no further work. Obviously, the Department of Transport have been very much busy doing some other bits and pieces. Can't think why, but they have, in the time when we've not met previously, put out a further consultation with an agreement to look at that during the summer and then move it on later during the year. 3 recommendations you might remember: making traffic regulation orders simpler, which has happened during the emergency. We now don't have to, at the moment, there's some special regulations that mean we don't have to consult by depositing paper documents in places, and we can short circuit the amount of things that we put in the newspaper by pushing people to have a look at maps and things on the website. All great, and if that works now, it could work in the future. Their second was decriminalising the obstructive parking offence, which we talked about at great length here before, as a contravention which could be patrolled by our civil enforcement officers. And I think we've all agreed to that before. We've had a look at policies for doing that. And their third, which is maybe a step too far, I don't know, we'll see what the opinion is banning all parking outside London in the same way that is inside London, which says you can't park on the footway unless it says you can, which could bring quite a lot of signage. And of course, if you just move all the cars from the footway into the carriageway, it just brings you a whole round or raft of new problems. And we'll probably be looking to restrict parking everywhere, because at the moment it doesn't say you can't park in the carriageway unless it says you can unless it says you can't. So I think we've agreed previously in principle that we go as far as the second of those 2 points, and the third might be beyond what's practical, maybe thinking about the rural areas and the areas of narrow footways, or even really wide footways where it doesn't really matter if you park tidily at the back of it. And we've referred out to things like the considerate parking initiative and things like that previously. So there we are. It's a bit of a move down the road a little bit, pun intended, and come back to it maybe at the October meeting. We should have a bit more information.
Thank you. Councillor Danvers.
If it's going to be discussed at our next meeting, then I'll pass. But I do feel strongly about parking on the pavements.
If you would like to have a look at the minutes of the meeting, which are on the NEPP website for, was that last October or was that before?
October, December, I think we've looked at it, and we've looked at it 3 or 4 times in the past. There's a very good Transport Select Committee discussion as well. If you go and have a look for that footway parking in the Transport Select Committee and their recommendations, of which pretty much were these 3, and I think they've drawn the same conclusions that we've come to. I think nationally as well, our colleagues on a national basis are all a little bit worried about what going to a complete ban would mean. But if we're able to remove that really obstructive parking, which I think we all agree is just a nuisance, then that would be a lot better.
And it's not just about, it's not footway parking, it's not pavement parking. This is a different issue, although pavement parking is obstruction parking, but pavement parking on its own is not all of obstruction parking, if that makes sense. So that's why it's been focused on obstruction parking, and the same is true with junction protection markings that we put in and things like that. It's all part of it, which we can't enforce unless we have junction protection markings, for instance. So we would be able to enforce stuff like that. It's the nuisance stuff that really does get up people's noses, but also following a reasonable response, and our policies that we have so far agreed are along the lines of, where appropriate, so long as you have 4 feet or 123 centimetres, which should near as damn it the same, but it's a nice easy number to remember, in between an obstruction and your vehicle, then you should be all right. But if you park up against a lamppost and nobody can get past, you're going to get a ticket. It's a bit about common sense, but it's not only about pavement parking. It is available on the minutes. I'm sure that we could dig them out somewhere and maybe and send the appropriate link. I don't know, Owen, whether you could possibly find that.
Yes, I can have a look back through the minutes and the agenda packs from the previous meetings, and then I can send links to where they are on the NEPP website.
Brilliant. It'd be very useful, because it was quite a decent discussion we had about that. Thank you. Right, so that leads us on. We'll note Richard's verbal report. Thank you very much. All it's done is pushed everything to the right a bit, frustratingly, because I've been pushing on this for about 3 years. To note the democratic bits.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't really have much to say to add to the reports here, only to note that usually we would ask members to approve dates for the forthcoming municipal year's meetings in the March meeting, but unfortunately, given that was cancelled, they've had to be brought to this meeting instead, so apologies for that. And when it comes to looking at the forward plan of the JPC, it's currently listed as the forward plan for 2019-20, and I should clarify that should read 2020 to 2021. Apologies for the typo there. But I'm happy to take any questions on the items as they're laid out currently on the work programme, and any views from members about the current format of that.
I think it works okay. We have become used to it, those of us who've been around it for a bit. You will notice in page 104 on the paper numbers, or 112 on the PDF, that this meeting, of course, the June meeting, the annual meeting, is normally the busiest one, and there is not quite as much stuff to talk about at the following one. In October, of course, we will be looking at the TROs that are being proposed. There are going to be some interesting bits, I think, potentially in that by each of the districts, because we just don't really know what's happening. And I'm making the presumption that, despite the fact we are talking about who is holding the individual meetings, those meetings will revert to Zoom or Teams, depending on the situation and convenience, etc. We are not meeting physically. Councillor Eek.
On that particular issue, going forward, if we are able to socially have meetings face to face, as it were, if we cannot make a meeting, would it be sensible for us to allow Zoom participation by councillors who may not be able to make it for whatever reason in terms of their physical presence?
We haven't really got to that yet, and I don't think we've really thought about it, because of course nobody's doing it. People are either doing physical meetings where they can, which they can't, or else they're doing them all electronic. I have no problem with the electronic option. It is a little bit more fiddly and slightly longer winded, but we do tend to get business done. And from a sustainability point of view and not traveling places, it's quite good. But from a social point of view, it's not so good. So I hope we would be all out in one direction rather than another. It is preferred, of course, that we would like to be able to meet up.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Sorry, if I can come back again, but if we can look at that going forward, so that if there were a situation that arose where members can't make it, that we could include a Zoom connection. I'd be grateful.
I don't see that should be a huge impact, but Owen, you've got a comment there. Go on.
Just to say that we, as you say, Mr. Chairman, we haven't yet specifically gone into the potential for what we're calling hybrid meetings, which will potentially allow for some people who can to meet in one place, but also give the possibility for those who say maybe isolating, maybe in quarantine, to also attend electronically. But it is something that we've got on our radar, and certainly at Colchester Borough Council, it's something that we'll be considering and looking at the options for the future.
Great. Thank you very much. Yes, I think it's not beyond the wit of man to consider in the longer term, but it'll be communicated via electronic means anyway as we get closer to the next meeting. On that basis, at 15:32, I think we can close the meeting and thank all the patient officers who've been hiding behind their cameras for the most this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. I hope it's been informative to those people who were looking for information who have been watching on YouTube. And I hope it's been helpful to the members as well, who all of us seem to learn things every time we come to one of these meetings, which has been going on for quite a long time now for me. So it's good news in most areas, and I'm very pleased. And I want to thank Richard and the team for all the efforts they've been doing. I just want to do this publicly, for all the efforts that have been made by the team. Despite the shielding, despite the stay at home, we've been getting the stuff done. Been putting in restrictions that were agreed last year, so that's business as usual. They're all going in at the moment. Putting in added restrictions as a result of the COVID problems that have happened and people misusing the highway. Made immediate changes to both the enforcement, specifically the enforcement in commuter areas, recognizing that lots of people are staying at home and not enforcing those particular areas, but also making immediate extension to the permits that people have bought for a year and aren't going to be using because they're sitting at home doing work. So there are lots of benefits, a lot of social benefits, and a lot of positives that have been coming out of the work that's been done by our teams sitting in their homes around Colchester, but not always in, and some even in other foreign counties, Richard. Thank you very much, everybody. Let's close the meeting and say goodbye, and we look forward to seeing you, I hope, in person, if not in camera, at the next meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Chairman.